Hello and welcome back to Normal Island Live. I am joined today by the wonderful Noffel. How's it going?
I'm all good, Lewis. Thanks for having me on as usual.
Well, you haven't disappeared just yet, we had that time where it was like, hello, and then you just disappeared off camera, tech issues. So that's not one of those days. How's your week going so far? Was it Monday today? I'm literally, I don't even keep a track of the days.
I think yes, it is Monday. Yesterday or Sunday, I was at work, but it's been an interesting news week, so I can't wait to sort of discuss.
I know. Oh, so much to cover. We will move on. We have two stories today. I know we usually do three, but the first one is a chunky one, and you can probably guess what it is. But please remember to also like the stream, leave your comments so we can discuss them later on. And let's get into it. So, the Labour government's new immigration policy, Starmer has announced changes to immigration and visas, and the Green Party leadership is heating up. Adrian Ramsay and Ellie Chowns announces their co-leadership bid. So let's get on to the immigration story. So Keir Starmer and the Labour government, to much controversy, which we will get into shortly, have released their new policy on immigration and visas and other restrictions. I want to quickly go through the bullet points and then watch a clip of Starmer himself talking about the change and the controversy of his speech. Firstly, net migration reduction. So Labour is pledging to reduce net migration, criticising past Conservative policies, but provides no detailed targets. We have stricter skilled visa rules. So qualification requirements for skilled visas will rise from A level to a degree level with limited exceptions for shortage areas. They will have an end to overseas social care recruitment, which we heard about over the weekend. So all overseas hiring in social care will end by 2028 with a transition period, and concerns have been raised over potential staff shortages. Then we move on to the student visa restrictions, which will have tighter rules for student visas, especially at lower ranked institutions, and stricter oversight of course completion rates. So then we have tougher language standards, stricter English proficiency rules for visa extension and settlement. Adult dependents must demonstrate and improve their language skills. And then we move on to the longer path to settlement. And just to add, I didn't put this in the notes, but this was actually a Tory, I believe, Kemi Badenoch pledge, what she announced a few months ago. So they're just stealing it from there. A longer path to settlement. So settlement, indefinite leave to remain, now requires 10 years of residency, up from 5, prompting concerns over integration barriers. They will have harsher deportation rules. So deportation will apply to more offences, not just a 1+ year prison sentence, with emphasis on sexual crimes and reform of the appeals process. And then we move on to the immigration fees, which, by the way, again, didn't add this because I just thought of it now, but we actually have one of the most expensive immigration systems in the world in terms of staying here. And I'll come on to that later with a personal story of somebody that I know. The immigration skills charge for employers will rise by 32% to reflect inflation. Exemptions will remain for some sectors, and new e-identity system biometric residence cards to be replaced with a digital ID system as part of a broader immigration monitoring reforms. Now, a lot of information so far. Going to do the Keir Starmer clip in a second, and then we can move on to this first talking bit. But we do have some more information about this later. It's going to be very chunky, but please put your comments in the chat because I'll be very interested to see what everybody thinks about this. But we're going to watch the clip of Starmer, which is about 3 to 4 minutes long. I think it's important to watch. Usually we try and make clips a little bit shorter, so we're doing more talking. But I think the first 4 minutes of what he did on screen today is very important, and we can talk about the controversy around the speech.
Today we publish a white paper on immigration, a strategy absolutely central to my plan for change that will finally take back control of our borders and close the book on a squalid chapter for our politics, our economy and our country. Take back control. Everyone knows that slogan, and everyone knows what it meant on immigration, or at least that's what people thought. Because what followed from the previous government, starting with the people who used that slogan, was the complete opposite. between 2019 and 2023, even as they were going round our country, telling people with a straight face that they would get immigration down, net migration quadrupled until in 2023 it reached nearly 1 million. That's about the population of Birmingham, our second largest city. That's not control, it's chaos. And look, they must answer for themselves. But I don't think that you can do something like that by accident. It was a choice made even as they told you, told the country, they were doing the opposite. A one-nation experiment in open borders, conducted on a country that voted for control. Well, no more. Today, this Labour government is shutting down the lab. The experiment is over. We will deliver what you've asked for time and again, and we will take back control of our borders. And let me tell you why. Because I know, on a day like today, people who like politics will try to make this all about politics, about this or that strategy, targeting these voters, responding to that party. No. I'm doing this because it is right, because it is fair, and because it is what I believe in. Let me put it this way. Nations depend on rules, fair rules. Sometimes they're written down, often they're not. But either way, they give shape to our values, guide us towards our rights, of course, but also our responsibilities, the obligations we owe to each other. Now, in a diverse nation like ours, and I celebrate that, these rules become even more important. Without them, we risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together. So when you have an immigration system that seems almost designed to permit abuse, that encourages some businesses to bring in lower paid workers rather than invest in our young people, or simply one that is sold by politicians to the British people on an entirely false premise, then you're not championing growth, you're not championing justice, or however else people defend the status quo. You're actually contributing to the forces that are slowly pulling our country apart. So yes, I believe in this. I believe we need to reduce.
Well, there was one part in that speech that many jumped on. Obviously, there's many parts that we will talk about, but one part and one line sounded very similar to a famous speech in British political history. And our friends over at Navarra Media actually posted this very quickly after Starmer did this speech.
We risk becoming an island of strangers, not a nation that walks forward together.
They found themselves made strangers in their own country.
Yes, that is obviously the famous Rivers of Blood speech by Enoch Powell. I believe, was it 1967 or 1968? Just to put into context very quickly, obviously I'm sure everyone here knows the Rivers of Blood speech, but for anyone who doesn't, this was at a time when the government was about to send a bill and it was going to stop people getting discriminated against for housing, for employment. And this was a moment in British political history that is now often quoted every other week and every other day, with the Overton window that we're living in now and the side of it that we're living in now. And I was just browsing on the Guardian News live feed about all the updates throughout the day while the Keir Starmer speech was playing, and I saw that John McDonnell actually posted that he said this is the language of Enoch Powell. So, when sometimes people on the left can be, I think we can be sometimes a little bit dramatic, right? I think that's all sides are guilty of this, but you've got John McDonnell, the former Labour MP who's still suspended from the Labour Party, saying this is the words of Enoch Powell. Noffel, that is a lot of information. What are your kind of just initial thoughts? We've got the video, we've got the new restrictions and changes. and then we'll go into some more specifics.
So, obviously, we can look at this in two different spheres. One of them is obviously the speech and the language that Starmer is using. The second thing is to look at the economic side of this. It's really rich for Starmer to say that this isn't political, and that this is not about talking about the demographics, about voter change, but it quite inherently is, because Rupert Lowe, not long after Starmer tweeted the language restrictions out, said that he claims the online right have have shifted the Overton window, and there's more to do. So whether Starmer likes it or not, whether he can fool people or not, Reform UK are being emboldened from this, and they are convincing people that Labour are simply scared and they're just doing this to appease to their voters. So that's one aspect of this. The second aspect to look at this is from the economic side, which is whether, and it is true that most of the UK population want immigration down, whether or not we think that's a good thing, you still would need immigration as a interim period if you are to skill up UK workers, because it can't happen overnight. You cannot reform the care sector while still giving out private contracts. You cannot reform the care sector while still offering them low pay, and you certainly can't skill up British workers if you're not investing in the human capital to do that. So whether you want to see net migration up or down, let's say you want to see it down, you cannot simply end immigration in the way Starmer is talking about, albeit at a very low number, which is estimated from these policies, and expect that we will somehow improve our health service, because you're still going to be shilling out a ton of money into places it shouldn't be.
Yeah, what frustrates me about all of this is the numbers game, and obviously it's weaponized by the right, and now obviously Keir Starmer, who is the new right, they're playing into this game too. For me, it's not about getting the numbers down. This isn't, for me, obviously about reducing immigration. That shouldn't be the motivation about any of this. It's concerning the amount of immigration that we have to rely on, because that's an unstable source of human capital in many ways, because there is a global shortage of workers in lots of different areas, right? We have medical workers, there's a global shortage of those, and lots of other different types of skilled workers. And we're firstly taking people from their country who, and we're causing shortages there. And the motivation for me shouldn't be about reducing the numbers, but it should be about skilling up and obviously helping people in the UK. But even if we threw every resource that we had in terms of, making sure everybody had all the money, all the resources, all the skills, all the training that they had to, thrive and work and earn good money and have good housing, the reality is we still wouldn't have enough people, and we're always going to have to rely on immigration to some extent. Our birth rate is not going to go back to replacement. Like, I think it was Finland that had the only successful actual push with this, and they managed to push the birth rate up more than any other country has. But it's still, I believe, and anyone in the comments correct me if I'm wrong, they're still not back at replacement rate. They just had the best gains, so to speak. But again, this ties into this like infinite growth system that we're in, right? It always comes back essentially to capitalism. And we have an aging population. We have a crappy economy. And I feel like if Labour wanted to do this, they could go down the path of, we need to scale up people. We need to invest in people. We need to invest in communities. We need to invest in education. But tied to the rhetoric of everything else that's come with this Labour government and Keir Starmer, tied to, the close quote, it's not an exact quote, but the close quote to Enoch Powell, I don't even know what to almost like say anymore. I don't know where to go with this. We keep saying that they've moved the Overton window. They are essentially opening the gates to the right, because why would you vote for Labour, right? They've essentially stolen a couple of Tory policies here, with the extension to how long it takes to get indefinitely to remain, and then they're essentially buying into the reform policy of deporting all foreign criminals. Now, they didn't say they're going to deport all foreign criminals, but they're changing the rules around that. They're reducing it. You would just vote for these parties, wouldn't you, if you wanted this? So Labour are offering nothing. They're moving the Overton window. They're normalizing this. They're invoking the language of one of the most far-right, racist, inflammatory speeches in all of British political history. But for what? They're not gaining anything. They're not gaining any support. And Nigel Farage tweeted out today, 600 people have come on boats today. One of them might be an Iranian terrorist, is what he said. And you know what? If Starmer tweeted the same thing out tomorrow, just wouldn't surprise me. If you told me that was a Starmer tweet, wouldn't surprise me anymore. So I don't
I think
know where to go with this, but what are your thoughts?
I think what's particularly interesting to me as well is not just the proximity towards using language now, right? We're talking about strangers in your own country, but it's also the denial Starmer has, and quite broadly the Labour Party, that this is not to appease anyone. This is not a shift to the right at all. This is what Labour is now, and this is what Labour will be until the next election. And I think that particularly is quite scary because we're seeing a Labour Party that's in limbo. We're not seeing one that's dedicated on premises of what they used to be or necessarily representing working people. No matter how Starmer can say it, and no matter what we personally think, Reform have got the upper hand here. They are controlling the narrative, and the far right have got the access to shift the political debate further to the right. You can say that's not the case, but the truth is, liberalism does in some cases lead to the early stages of populist right-wing governments. And what I was saying earlier is it's particularly scary because if we look a couple years later down the line, Reform is still estimated to gain seats. Of course, if they push for even more radical ideas, let's say there's more splintering between Farage and Rupert Lowe, Labour's just going to go straight to Reform and go straight to their policies. And I think that's the most dangerous place we're at. It's not Reform. Reform are quite predictable. It's actually Labour that are very dangerous right now. And we don't know where they're going to push the political debate further because we don't simply know how Reform are going to respond to this. And even on the backdrop of the local election, I think Reform have surprised themselves in some way of how well they've also done. So Labour are quite frankly emboldening them. I'm sure Farage is laughing, quite frankly, behind the scenes of how easily he's been able to do this. And I think it is going to grow to look at people like going to grow where the UK population is looking at Starmer and they're thinking, we really do have a spineless leader. I want someone that's a strongman. And unfortunately, this is the era of strongman politics. Farage cozies up to Trump. He likes his tactics, and simply people are going to go to Reform.
Yeah, I think from what I can guess here, this is my theory on like what is exactly going through their mind. It seems to me like they're trying to eliminate possible headlines which are currently being weaponized. We all know the headlines of a few weeks ago, was it like a month ago, the asylum seeker gets to stay in the country, he was a criminal for like not liking chicken nuggets. Again, the story was bullshit. Look into it. Just I'm not even going to go into it, but it was bullshit. There's all these types of headlines every week, every other day. The Telegraph is publishing. The Telegraph keep a really close eye on this, but other ones do it too, about all these like ridiculous stories of how a criminal can stay in the country. There's no point even going into the facts and figures of how many people are successful in these appeals because it's actually very little. But these are causing headlines. So they're changing or wanting to change how Article 8, the right to family life, I think the correct line is for Article 8 in the ECHR. They're trying to change how that's applied in the UK. That gets rid of those headlines. When it comes to obviously being able to just deport anyone else, they're obviously making sure that if there can't possibly be a headline where there is a person in the country who may commit a very minor sexual offence in any way. It could be, flashing, and then that person can now be deported under these rules. I don't argue about that, but it seems to me that's essentially what they're trying to do with these changes. And when it comes to just simply getting the numbers down, as you mentioned, it's just overall, I think it's just a terrible direction to put the economy in, because essentially you can try and get the numbers down all you want, but unless you fix the root issue of why we need this immigration, why we rely on it so much, you're just only going to harm us. And all these changes and all these revisions, it just seems like they're trying to eliminate headlines instead of like making them for themselves, because they know that there's basically no opportunity here for them. They can't make any good news, so they're just trying to eliminate any bad news against them. And I feel like their mindset is, if we just become more right wing, we can defeat the far right, and then it's like it pays itself off, right? It's worth it. It's a sacrifice that we have to make. But what's the country going to look like in 5 years if this does actually become genuinely the new norm? Because this is, in many ways, hard right policies that the Tories would absolutely love and endorse. They're obviously going to attack them, right, and be like, "Oh, it doesn't go far enough." But in the background, they'd be eating this shit up. If this was Kemi Badenoch's new policy, everybody in her party would be probably very happy with her. And what is the country going to look like in 5 years when this is just the new norm, where we are harming ourselves constantly, which we already have with Brexit. We're harming ourselves with this, and it's just now normal. Like, we're solidly in the hard right part of the Overton window, and I just don't see a way back from it, to be honest.
Well, that's the irony, and one of the things I think Starman was talking about, which is community. And community is such a big topic for a lot of people over, the last decade plus of austerity. They feel like there is no community. They feel like all you have is individualism. People are concerned with their own lives, and people aren't bridging gaps in local areas and building up things like it used to. Youth clubs, the idea of having enough financial capability to go out and do things with friends and family, working overtime, those sort of things, austerity cuts which damage your public services that you use. Those are all results of those are all things which cause community to shrink. And when we're looking at the future and we're creating an environment in which we're saying England should not be home to people who can't speak English, you're amplifying the community issue of looking inwards within your own community to see who deserves to be here. That's basically what we're doing. Do you deserve to be here, or do you not deserve to be here? And I think that premise is particularly worrying because it inherently leads to a racialized way of thinking, because the color of the people that we see in the news that is related to immigration, it's always black and brown. It's always people from the Middle East. When you talk about people not speaking English, it's usually those from the Middle East. And it has contributed to this community policing thing where you're looking at people of different races and you are assuming that they don't deserve to be here. So I think if you want a community back, if you want a society in which you feel like your local neighborhoods are thriving, we need to cut out American businesses buying up places on your high street, bring back the ability for people to go back and build their own businesses. You need to bring back funding to councils, which will allow for that sort of integration where people can bridge those sort of gaps. I think it's just ironic, frankly, economically even speaking, that anyone thinks that this sort of policy will enrich their local communities. It won't. I've grown up in multicultural areas. I've grown up with people that can't speak English, and we've gotten along fine, actually, because we're not constantly policing each other. And, as things get worse, I think that it's going to become a hostile environment for everyone.
Yeah, one topic that came up when Trump first came in was about him trying to end birthright citizenship. And the first pushback was all the researchers, all the academics, all the experts on this topic who said, no, like, we have been studying like this for years, and actually giving people birthright citizenship, and it's not necessarily what I'm advocating for, but I'll get to the point, is that it makes people feel like that they belong, that it actually helps integration. It helps people fitting into the community, feeling American, because they have that right from birth. And this idea as well of extending the right to claim citizenship or whatever it is up to around 10 years with some exceptions, it's just going to prolong that period. And it ties into, Trump trying to get rid of birthright citizenship. It's not the same thing, but if people have to wait longer to feel like they're British and feel like they have that security and feel like they have that citizenship, it's going to harm integration. It's going to harm people feeling safe and secure in this country. Because obviously as well, look what Trump's also done, right? He's got rid of, literally with a swipe of a pen, people who were here on certain types of special visas, and they were in the country, and some of them were just, months, if not years away from getting citizenship. And he, with a swipe of a pen, he's just cancelled their visas. And, we could have a period of time where reform come into power and do something similar because of this extension. Because there are people in this country now who would have qualified for citizenship if they change these rules, that will have to now wait longer. And then on top of that, these visa changes, if you have to wait, however many extra years in the country to get your citizenship, then the visa costs alone. So I said earlier, personal story. It's personal to somebody else. I used to work with a woman at a charity that I used to work for. She's South African. She has 3 children. Her and her husband moved here. He's a skilled worker. He works in finance. Luckily, he's very rich. He earns good money. I think pretty much in the high six figures. But she was telling me when I was working with her, every other year they have to pay these visa fees, and it's £1,500 to £2,000 per family member. So just do the maths. It's almost there's 5 of them, so about 10 grand. It's going to be completely unfeasible for some people. There are people here who are skilled workers, but of course they might be on 40, 50, 60 grand. You can't pay out 10 grand every year on top of the cost of living here, having 3 kids. So, skilled workers who we do actually need, we have shortages. People come here, share their skills. They help grow the industry here. With their skills that we don't even have in this country. And do you think they're going to come here now if they have to, pay these visa fees for an extra 5 years? It's just creating a more hostile environment. And Zoe Gardner, friend of the show, if you don't follow her, please go and do. You'll see her on like BBC, LBC, being a big advocate for a more friendly, humane immigration system. And she wrote an article today in LBC, an opinion piece, basically saying everything that I just said about how this is not going to help community. It's actually going to harm community because people are going to have to wait longer and be more insecure while they're here for a longer period of time. So how does that help build up the community in any way? We will move on to the next part of the story very quickly because I want to make sure that we cover everything. We have a poll related to this, which was released today by British Future, showing that when you add a little nuance to the numbers game and when it comes to immigration, there is actually wide support for immigration in lots of different ways. So most of the public would choose not to reduce migration of people coming to the UK for a wide range of jobs, from doctors at 77% of people and care home workers at 71%, to fruit pickers at 70% and catering staff at 63%, lorry drivers at 63%, and engineers at 65%. And along with that, 2/3, 65% of people who participated say they would not reduce the number of students coming to the UK. And people who voted Labour in 2024 are less inclined to support reductions, with 55% preferring overall immigration numbers to stay the same or increase. So, British Future put together this poll, very good and very timely for today. So thank you to them. And I just think it's also worth pointing out, as the Telegraph did, and sorry, I've just, I didn't put the graphic up for this, but I will read it out. But this is from the Telegraph, just reminding us what Keir Starmer said just 5 years ago. So Keir Starmer joined dozens of Labour MPs campaigning against the deportation of about 50 foreign criminals to Jamaica. When he ran for the Labour leadership, he demanded free movement after Brexit, as well as full voting rights for EU nationals. And he used his maiden speech in Parliament to raise concerns about a Tory attempt to stop dangerous foreign criminals using human rights laws to avoid deportation. So I took that out of the Telegraph today just to kind of emphasize how far Keir Starmer has come. And it's not one of these like moments where it's like, oh, you said this thing 5 years ago, it's a gotcha. I just think it's an incredibly important measure to say how far somebody's come, because I'm not one of these people who expect my politicians to have said something 10 years ago and they have to, never ever change their mind. That their mind can change, their opinion can develop, and we can have honest conversations about that. But I think it's a very, very stark and dangerous contrast to, where he said he was, just like when he ran for the Labour leadership and made all these wonderful, very left-leaning promises. And as soon as he got the power, he purged the left of the party, moved to the right, and has helped move the Overton window to where it is now. Not full. If people looking at this polling data, and this isn't unique, I've seen this polling being done before. Martin Lewis actually went very viral for a speech like this 2 or 3 years ago, basically saying, when you ask people, should we reduce immigration, they'll say yes, 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 everyone will say yes. But as soon as you say, well, should we reduce immigration on doctors, most people will say no. And you just add a tiny little bit of nuance to the conversation, and you will see that people will quickly answer very differently. So why we're not having nuanced conversations about this, not whole.
I think it's the whole reason we're talking about this, isn't it? It's really interesting. There was a similar poll done in multiple different states in America, right? And this is in regards to mass amnesty, which is allowing people in and giving them citizenship, or the ability to be on track to get citizenship, and deportation. And overwhelmingly, people supported mass amnesty more. And you once again added nuance to that question when you were specifically talking about people in essential service jobs, such as agriculture and construction, and it boosted even more. And it really just relays back to the idea that when you think about Britain, and when you think about the idea of working hard, if you ask people, would you like a hard worker, in which they know there's a large shortage of essential workers in certain sectors, they're of course going to say yes. But the problem is that Farage's narrative and the scapegoating of immigrants relies on the idea that they're not hardworking, right? It relies and creates this image of the immigrant, which is coming to this country to claim benefits, and that is coming here to commit crime and isn't as valued as anyone else in the UK. And that going forward is the image that we're creating of immigration versus what we've known for decades. We've always brought immigrants over from different colonies that we used to have, for example, and we've always brought immigrants over when we needed large scale projects. And so I think the reason that we're seeing a shift in nuance is because we need simple narratives to justify the fact that if reform come into power, and if there is a party like Labour, which we can say they are right on these policies, they are not substantially going to change anything in regards to class interests. Instead, they want to stay here. They just want to move the Overton window and scapegoat someone else to put forward their policies. And this is reflected in America as well. We're seeing Trump do heavy cutting of the state and creating a massive scapegoat where he's sending people over to El Salvador, where the Supreme Court is ruling that they weren't supposed to be there. So I think this whole conversation really ties back to what is the party in power, or the party that wants to be in power, going to change? Nothing. They're still capitalists after all. But what do they need to create an image of to create more and more pro-business policies and not fix the ground root issues that the UK is facing?
Yeah, and just to mention as well, but we've said this so much today. It's the key word, like the Overton window, the Overton window. You know, with Trump, when he met, is it Bukele? I can't remember his name, the El Salvadorian leader. When he came to the White House, right, there was that moment where he was caught on tape, right? You know, where Trump was saying, "Oh, you need to build 5 more of these prisons because we want to send natural born." I can't remember the term they used. Basically, he wanted to send US citizens to these prisons who are criminals, and that obviously got backlash on the left, the typical stuff, but barely any movement on the right. And that's how far the Overton window has moved there, where Trump loses barely any support whatsoever when he says he wants to send US citizens to a foreign country in a mega prison, which is disgusting for human rights. And we are the effect in America is always a delay. We always have some things that come over here to America quickly and some of them that are more slowly. And our Overton window is slightly behind America's, but it's always been just behind, but it's continued moving forward. And I'm just scared where we do get to the point, it's not common as well. I know it's so easy just to shit on reform voters, but it's not actually common, but it does happen. And it happened yesterday. I met a reform voter on a TikTok live when we were chatting. There was 2 of them there. One of them was awful, but the other guy was just like, oh, we should just fucking execute all these people. These people exist. And I'm not saying that's a representation of all of reform, but I think that is a growing number of people who would literally accept that. People, the joke that, the children yearn for the mines is like a kind of meme joke. I genuinely think people yearn for fascism. There's always that group of people who yearn for fascism where, if Nigel Farage turned around and was like, oh yeah, these migrants have committed a sex crime, we're going to execute them, I think he'd have like, not a massive, but a substantial amount of people who'd be like, yeah, go for it. How do I sign up? I think these people exist in the UK. They definitely exist in America. And I think that growing number of people do exist here. That far right, it's not even far right, it's just like complete ultra right mentality where people are literally probably ready to kill people. Am I being over dramatic? Is that where we are with some people in part of the Overton window? Or am I too chronically online?
I think there is I have had anecdotes. We've seen anecdotes of people specifically talk about, and we're obviously talking in small terms, about people that have wanted the army deployed to the border and to literally shoot rubber dinghies. But it's also the bringing in of ideas radical ones, very radical ones, near fascist ideas or fascist rhetoric at the very least, and turning it into a simple narrative that makes sense for people. Great replacement theory is a big one, and I know, Lewis, you've come across that one so much before, where
Oh,
people are
yes.
genuinely convinced that the white population within the UK is being replaced under this idea of Islamic domination as a blowback for the horrible stuff that happened in the Middle East, or at the very least, there is some idea of a cultural shift and change in the favors of, religions that dominate people that are coming in from immigration. So, are we going to see people in a couple years quite literally calling for the death of immigrants? No, I don't think so. But are we putting fascist rhetoric in a simplified term, which most people dangerously will subscribe to because it relies on stereotypes that they're familiar with and gives them an idea of what makes Britain so shit right now? Absolutely.
Yeah, and what's also a shame, is VE Day, last week, a victory in Europe, and we've got, I do this spiel sometimes. You've heard me say it with, after World War II, we wanted to create a system in place and put safeguards in place to stop right-wing nationalist governments coming to power who scapegoat minorities, and then, doing absolute atrocities. And again, I don't think it's fair to say that, Nigel Farage is, Hitler. I don't think it's fair to say that. It is fair to say that all the rhetoric, some of the policy, and the way they treat people and demonize them is exactly the same. It's not going to say, I'm not saying he's going to put them all in a gas chamber, right? It's two different things. And it annoys me when people conflate those things, but it is important to compare the actions of people in the past to what they are doing now. And we created the system after World War II in an attempt to give people a system in human rights. And, it was Winston Churchill who said we need a united Europe. That's the way we defeat this, by standing together and creating a united Europe. And also he was a huge proponent for the ECHR. And now we've got a right-wing nationalistic party rising up who've managed to convince people to leave the European Union, and now are on the rise to convince people to leave the ECHR, which along with that will probably come with every other international law that is out there. And it's almost like a shame to our history. And I feel like there's this like part of the left that almost like needs to take that back a little bit more and invoke that, patriotism when it comes to like, this is what we fought against. But ultimately what scares me is that I fear that I'm understanding the mindsets of what led to these things in the past, where we almost like look back in history and think that these were, it was the 1930s and 20s. These people were just dumb and uneducated. They didn't have, really robust education systems, and we didn't have access to the information that we do now. But I feel like what I've learned from meeting with literally thousands of these people, and also I've met with thousands of Trumpers online over the years too, and some in person, is that it's not just them being stupid. They think it's logical. They genuinely think it's logical. It's not just actual ignorance. In their mind, it makes sense. And I struggle to fight against that because they don't accept reality. They don't accept facts. They don't accept logic. But in their mind, everything that they believe makes sense. And I feel like they don't really teach that part really in history. And we just assume that these people, it was 100 years ago, these people were, stupid and idiotic and they were just uneducated. And that's what scares me when we see this rising again.
No, I think.
Am I being too dramatic today? I don't know. Am I being too dramatic?
No.
Being too doom and gloom? Please tell me in the comments.
I think one last thing I want to add to this quickly on the backdrop of what you've said, which is really true. And I was thinking about this today when it came to victory in Europe, right? And I was thinking about the idea that when I speak to people who vote reform, they were speaking about on VE Day, they were saying, well, our veterans wouldn't have stood for this. And I said, well, stood for what? And they said the replacement or the invasion that we're seeing right now. And I think it's a really important way to look at how fascists came to power in before World War II. And like I said, I'm not calling Nigel Farage Hitler. But what was interesting in one of the books written about these SS soldiers and officers, which caused the Holocaust, but also a study on the overall population. There were two main things, and this was that these were not monstrous, evil psychopaths or sociopaths that you see in Mission Impossible or these different movies. They were relatively normal people. They were relatively functioning citizens that didn't have anything necessarily wrong with them, but they bore apathy, which was the lack of care of what was going on in their country. Or two, the other side of history, which isn't talked about, is the fact that when people came to power, it was on the backdrop of preserving everything, but just changing the scapegoat of what's going wrong. And I think that's really important, is that the way this international system of capitalism works is when you have a far-right populist government that comes into power, or fascists, or anyone that has strong rhetoric like Donald Trump or Viktor Orban in Hungary, for example, or Bukele in El Salvador, they preserve everything when it comes to the class divide and making poor people poorer, but they only change the scapegoat of who is causing those issues. And that is one part that we're never taught in history, is the fact that nothing really changed except for capitalizing off the losses that working people feel. And after these governments come into power, nothing still changes for them. And that's the road where you go to the final solution. I'm not saying we're going to head there, but I'm simply paralleling the things that cause people with such rhetorics to rise.
Yeah, because I'll move on to the second story after I say this as well, because it's not even necessarily the Reform Party that I'm most worried about. My biggest worry in terms of history repeating itself is that Nigel Farage is just the stepping stone to then what comes next, to then what becomes acceptable. It's not just a case of, oh, there's a right leaning party or a centrist party in power, and then suddenly history tells us that this crazy far right genocidal party comes into power. I don't think it's ever as simple as that. Nigel Farage might be seen in many ways as far right, and if he comes into power, he'll do some very bad things. And again, going back to the whole, he's not going to put people in gas chambers, or I don't think he would. The next person might, and that's the stepping stone that we're talking about. It's what's acceptable and what isn't. And Nigel Farage might not be the be all and end all. It's just a case of we have to beat him. And then once we beat him, if we do, then everything will go back to normal. Everything will be fine. That's not the case. It's about who comes after Nigel Farage. If somebody like a Rupert Lowe, who obviously hasn't managed to stay in the party, he is Nigel Farage has never really talked about. I don't think anybody can correct me in the comments. Like he's not loud about it. Genuine re-immigration. He doesn't go as far as like some people in the AfD in Germany do, or Marine Le Pen's party in France. He actually stays comfortably in certain places while doing certain types of dog whistles. And again, please correct me if I'm wrong in the comments, but Rupert Lowe is very much like, I want to round all these people up, put them on a plane and send them back. I don't give a shit if they've done anything wrong or not. And that is somebody that existed within the Reform Party, and he could be a representation of what's next, and then what comes after that, and then what becomes acceptable. And the next thing you know, history is actually repeating itself. I'm sure we'll have many comments on this that we'll have to go through, but we will do the second story and then we will get on to the comments. Thank you, Nothal. So, a little bit lighter, the Green Party. So, Green Party MPs Adrian, Ramsay and Ellie Chowns have announced a joint bid for party leadership, emphasising their track record of winning seats in traditionally conservative areas. So, Adrian Ramsay has been the co-leader for the last 4 years, most of which he was not an elected MP. Which will make relevant sense in a second. We've already talked about Zach Palansky. This comes after co-leader Carla Denyer stepped down to focus on constituencies work. Ramsay and Chowns argued that the leadership should remain with sitting MPs given their daily presence in Westminster and their ability to influence national debates. Their pitch counters Zach Palansky, the deputy leader and non-MP, but he's an elected member of the London Assembly and he's got a good profile and it's building. He's also running and has called for a more populist reform style strategy. We've obviously covered this so much on the show now, but this will obviously be a continuing conversation to see who obviously takes over the Green Party. But Ramsay and Chowns reject Zach's approach, saying broad inclusive campaigns are more effective at winning over supporters. Now, with UK politics at a volatile juncture, they stress the importance of experienced parliamentary leadership to grow the party's influence. And Chowns, a former councillor and MEP, said that Ramsay would be her and Ramsay would be a well-matched pair with the credibility and visibility needed to lead the Greens forward. Can't get my words out now. We're getting towards the end of the show. But not full. We've got Zach Palansky running, Denya stepping down, who was obviously, quite high profile. We've got Ellie, Chowns, and Adrian Ramsay running as co-leaders in somewhat opposition of Zach's approach. Is this just going to kind of fracture the Green Party's image and make them seem, I don't know, a little messy, perhaps? What are your thoughts on this?
I think there's two distinct strategies that are going on here. And that's coming from someone who's spoken to people in the Green Party. You have Zach Palansky as an image who stands for populism and someone that understands that right now what Labour is doing is the best way to, the terrible things Labour is doing by throwing themselves in the bed of the far right and reform rhetoric. The best thing you can do and the easiest thing you can do on the left is call them out and capitalize off that and essentially create a space where people genuinely want to see change, because Labour has been seen as the working class progressive even party, right? And he's taking it in that direction where he's saying there's no time to waste. We can use this as a way to get the Green Party more MPs, to get them to build more local communities, and we can in fact bring the fight to Farage and have real change for working people. And I think what's mirrored is Adrian Ramsay's and Ellie's strategy, which isn't necessarily bad in terms of what they're vying for, but it appeals to older, more sensible voters, which kind of don't want to be anti-establishment, but are okay with a slow-paced way of getting the Greens more power, as long as they sort of represent themselves as sensible and people that aren't anti-establishment. They're a part of the establishment, but they're making sure they're fighting for you. And I think it talks about two different strategies, and that is mainly the politics of this country, where it's very British actually, which is to be sensible, reserved, keep a tight lip, or do you want to see something radically different and capitalize off the losses that Labour has made? And I don't know about you, I think Zach's formula is far more impactful to getting those local communities and Green Party MPs, whereas Adrian and Ellies isn't necessarily bad. I just don't necessarily think it speaks to a lot of people at the moment outside of their party.
I think what's interesting, and Jim's just touched on this in the comments as well, about there's like ups and downs to each win. I agree, actually, with Adrian and Ellie when they're talking about the idea that their MPs, they are more likely to be able to leverage their position to get more coverage for the Greens. I think that's a very fair argument. But obviously, if Zach wins and he's the sole leader of the Labour Party, the Green Party, as Jim said, it would benefit the Greens to have one leader, to have this like united leader that you can lead behind. But it's almost like you have a London Assembly leader as leader of the party who might not be able to get as much coverage, but that's up to him to obviously leverage his position and power to make sure that he gets coverage and demand it. But then you've also, on the other side, you've got two co-leaders, which I think is bad for the party, but they are both MPs. Again, I consume a lot of political news. I have my own biases about what stories I pay attention to, but even without Turn Left covering Zach like we did very recently, I see Zach on social media. I see him on, I prefer TikTok, but I browse around different places. I always see Zach more. I've seen Zach more than Ellie Chowns and Adrian Ramsay put together. So he's obviously got the profile. He's obviously got the flair, and people want to talk to him. But, will it harm the party by having somebody who's not an MP as the leader? Will that confuse things just as much as the co-leader type of thing does?
Yeah, I think it was Adrian that basically put forward the idea that the next leader of the Green Party has to be an MP, but I don't necessarily think that has to be the case. What I do want to stress on top of what you said is Ellie and Adrian are loved within their party. They are, and Ellie especially has a very good track record in local areas, of course, and it's one of the best things that the Greens have done with their sort of strategy of always getting more seats, is being very community based and very community focused, and genuinely gaining the support of people there in order to build up their councillor seats. And so I don't necessarily think what they're vying for is a bad thing. They are very loved within their party, but it's going to be extremely close for a leadership bid from what I've asked people that were essentially have been in the party since 2020, since 2021. They genuinely do feel like it's going to come very close. And I think it does, as people have mentioned in the comments, sort of speak to the strategy of, okay, it's not bad. They have gained local community support. But how are they viewed on the big stage more widely to people that feel like they need a committed leader that is far more, I'd say, able to tackle the right and bring prosperity for climate justice, social justice, and more importantly, what Zach's talking about now, which is economic justice. And I think that's a really interesting conversation that we'll see play out in the next couple months.
Yeah, I think obviously everyone on both sides needs to be careful. I think Zach needs to be careful when it comes to certain things like NATO. And if
Yeah,
Adrian and Ellie want to fight for this, then I think they need to show a bit of Zach what Zach's trying to offer. Right? I don't necessarily always agree in the careful and calm, sensible approach that they've got. I get. That they've made success. No one can actually deny the Green success. They're actually probably one of the
100%.
most successful parties of the last few decades in terms of their actual growth when it comes to numbers of councillors, how they keep doubling and doubling and doubling, and they don't get the attention that they deserve. All these things are absolutely true. However, is this the right era to be going for that approach when this opportunity is being presented to them? I understand why it would make sense at pretty much any other election before this, but I don't think it'll make sense for the next election with the current climate that we're in. So, Ellie, Adrian, obviously we'd love to have you on the show. And we can obviously maybe talk about this, but I do think they need to harness a bit of Zach's flair and power if they want to be able to compete and win over, younger people who find people like Carla and Zach attractive, because those two have raised their profile massively just in the last year. And I'm sorry, but I read and consume a lot of news and politics, and I barely hear anything about Adrian and Ellie, and that's probably the fault of the media too. But Carla, Denya, and Zach have managed to overcome that. So why haven't they?
One last thing I want to
Sure.
say on this as well is I'm actually quite happy if this is possibly scared Adrian Ramsay just a tiny bit. And the reason for that is I do feel like his strategy was lacking in what he wanted to do over the last couple of weeks, because there was a point where he was talking about having a debate with Nigel Farage, which I think is possibly the worst idea, close to uttering the thing about pylons that he could have possibly done,
Yeah.
because Adrian Ramsay doesn't have the type of persona where I feel like he'll be able to one up Farage if Farage gets under his skin or is able to strongman the debate. So in fact, I think it's good, even if people aren't backing Zach, which I think they are, it's going to be a close race. I think this is a good thing. It gives them a wake-up call that the type of strategy that they've been vying for the last couple months after this election isn't the one they should be chasing.
Yeah. So I was distracted by the comments, which we are going to move on to now. We're going to move on to some lovely, wonderful comments. But I do have to mention one thing, because I know Callum, the producer, is going to tell me off for not mentioning it earlier, but I'm going to mention it now. One interesting part of that story, actually, is that the announcement for them becoming, running for co-leaders was actually released early and mistakenly by the BBC. It was embargoed until today. And then the BBC released it on BBC Radio 4 yesterday, early, accidentally. We have sources that have confirmed this. And Adrian got a lot of criticism because it was like very typical of Adrian to, release the idea that he's running as co-leader on, BBC Radio 4. And instead of making, a bit more of a generalized, more broad approach, making a bit more of a splash and show of it. So it's kind of squandered a little bit of his launch into leadership. Callum, did I get that right? I can't hear Callum.
You can now.
There we go.
Hi. Yeah, that's essentially what happened. It's the announcement was made at about 7 minutes past 10 last night on BBC Radio 4 during their Westminster hour. And then obviously people were talking about it on Twitter. I actually had the news broken to me by our good friend Helena No Justice MTG, because she'd obviously seen it and tweeted it out. But it was interesting that no other outlets were reporting it. There was nothing on their official Twitter feeds. There was nothing from Adrian or Ellie at all. And then today, there was an exclusive with The Guardian, and they had a campaign video that they put out on this new YouTube channel that they've set up. But it was all just a bit bonkers because, I mean, I immediately saw that and thought, well, that's a deliberate decision, but maybe it's not. But the fact that so many of us even thought that it could be a deliberate decision, I think speaks volumes in terms of the type of campaigners that Adrian's particularly is. It wouldn't be beyond the realms of possibility that they would announce a bid for the leadership on BBC Radio 4 on a Sunday night at 10 p.m. Like, it's the sort of old-fashioned type thing that would that they would do. Now, that brings me nicely on to Edward's comment.
Yes,
Go on.
I was going to say we need to move on to the comments because we only have a limited time.
Yeah, no, they're here. So Edward said Ramsay and Chowns are the old school middle class village green preservation society Lib Dem types. They need to be defeated, otherwise a lot of socialist work in the Greens is down the drain. I do think that, I mean, I don't know what you two think, but I do think that, Adrian alongside Carla, the two of them as co-leaders, they have done a lot for the party. They've gotten the party to where it is now. But I do think the party needs to move in a new direction. But this description of them from Edward is
I'm going to compliment this comment by just quickly clicking on one that came up from Andrew just a couple of minutes ago. I think we need something other than the Greens. They've been going since the 70s and still haven't made a real dent. I like Gas, but I don't really think he has enough bite to actually make change. I'm not bringing this up to say, oh, this is absolutely right. But I do think there is an element as well from the left who obviously been disenfranchised from Labour. We have many Green supporters who've supported them for absolutely years. But people out there are still settling for Labour. Are people like just settling for the Greens because they have some good policies, but there's a lot of things that people just don't agree with at all, and they're not going in the right direction with. So, do we need something absolutely brand new, which is going to encompass this like fractured left who don't know where to go, or are people going to settle for the Greens? I don't know if that's an interesting conversation.
It's a good point. Go on, Nafal.
I think it is because it's something I've heard political commentators talk about. I think I've heard people and our friends at Novara talk about it as well. I've heard even analysts and column writers talk about. I think you make an interesting point because people that I have spoken to feel like there's always the overarching sense of environmentalism within the Greens, which is not a bad thing. It's totally not a bad thing. However, that can be a turn off for people, and I think it's important to recognize that. And people do feel like, and I'm not saying the climate isn't a big issue, because it is. Britain's one of the most climate-friendly populations that are actually in favor of pushing forward pro-climate policies compared to Western European counterparts, right? If we exclude NIMBYs. But there is that sense when I do talk to people outside the Green Party, they're like, well, aren't they just a bunch of people that are interested in climate change? Like, do they have anything really to do with what will matter to me? I mean, of course I care about the climate, but do I care about it right now to vote for a Green Party? I don't know, because the Green Party concept is all over Europe. And, it's not something that has it does sort of have a monolithic image to it, is what I'm trying to say.
This is going to be put to the test really soon, though, because there's been more talk from Corbyn over the last few days about the Independence Alliance and what they may or may not be coming up with before the next general election, and it'll be really interesting to see. I think depending on the way that the party vote for in the leadership race, and like you said before, Noffel, I honestly think it's going to be a close one. There's a pretty even split in the party. It could go either way, and we also don't know who else is going to throw the hat in the ring. I'm sure it'll probably be between those two options, but it's gonna be interesting to see. But I think that depending on what happens with the leadership, I think that will plus what happens with this whole thing around the Independent Alliance and whether or not they form like a party of sorts. It's going to be an interesting. It's going to be interesting to see what happens to the Green Party, because I do think that if there is a strong left-wing party that's born out of the Independent Alliance that comes on the scene, the Green Party haven't got that sort of strong populist presence to either work in coalition with it and be alongside it, or to sort of run in tandem with it. I do think the Greens could fall apart as quickly as they've grown.
Yeah, I'll quickly say this, but if we can do any donations or anything that we got on memberships after as well. But I just want to quickly say, like, if anybody's watching, I like Carla, I like Zach, got my criticisms of them. I don't have a strong enough opinion on Adrian and Ellie to make a really formulated opinion about them. But where I'm at right now, if I was to be like an honest voter, is that if there was an election right now locally where I am, I would probably vote Green. But I don't want to. And I'm not saying that to insult them in any way, but I still don't feel drawn in. I still don't feel like me as a Labour voter from years ago, as a young progressive leftist, I still don't feel like I'm being truly drawn in yet. So I think that's
Lewis,
something that they need to work on.
So Alice has said Adrian and Ellie's strategy is to take on the establishment. We must become the establishment. I mean, do you agree with that take? And does that make you want to vote for them?
No, I don't think it's necessarily. I don't think they, from what I understand, I don't feel like they're becoming the establishment. I just feel like this safe approach that they've gone, where they've like nice and steadily, but wonderfully grown over the years. It's just not going to work anymore. This is not the era. This is not the time. You need to grab people's attention. You need to call out what is actually happening in the world right now, and just be straight, honest, and talking. Because we could debate all day what the actual establishment is in any way, but people want something new, something different. And people want opposition, and people want somebody to stand up for them. And I still don't feel like anybody's really, really doing that to the best level.
Yeah. Nuffle, did you want to add anything to that?
No, I think Lewis's embodiment of the honest voter got me thinking about my version of the honest voter, which is kind of true, right? Like, there has not been, and fair play to them, they still have doubled their seats. Been enough work for the Green Party. Of course, we have to take into account their size and their campaign and who they're up against. Where I go out my way to vote for them because I feel like it's in their DNA to represent what I want. It's more so they are broadly aligned with what I want. And so there is that still sort of, like I said, monolithic image you get across Europe of a Green Party, but specifically within the Green Party that we have here, where it sort of feels like it's more climate focused, which isn't bad, but it in ways that they feel like that will take over from economic justice. And like you said, Cal, that's going to be put to the test now if Zach wins. And that's a really interesting thing we're going to have to look out for.
And like I say, alongside this possible growth in the Independent Alliance and what they come up with as well. So yeah, I will say I did dance with Ellie Chowns at conference last year, and she is lovely. She really is. But it's interesting. There's been a lot of criticism online in the last 24 hours aimed more towards her. I think there are many within the party that quite admire and respect her, and they're a bit confused as to why she's standing with Adrian, because those are people that maybe aren't a huge fan of his. But listen, they've got us to the point that the Greens have got 4 MPs in Parliament, which is the best that they've ever had. It is worth pointing out as well that Caroline Lucas has endorsed Ellie and Adrian's campaign as well. Now, when she came out and endorsed Adrian and Carla last time, I think that swayed a lot of people within the party to vote a particular way. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes. But we're going to have to move on to the other story now. I want to start with Rachel's comment. Concentration camps existed for many years before they became death camps.
Yeah, absolutely true. And this is what obviously a lot of people are pointing out with Trump right now. They're building these things on private land in the US. They obviously are using the El Salvador prison. We don't know who's going there. We don't know their names. We don't know anything about these people. They've only been identified on social media. And all we know is that nobody ever leaves these prisons. So are they just a concentration camp right now? Or are they a death camp right now? We just simply don't know. And that's the scary thing, because when you break down a human rights system, and when you collect this amount of power, you can hide things and you can get away with whatever you want. And this is why it's important to have these systems in place for transparency. For if people want to moan that it takes 2 years to deport somebody who's done something very bad and they should be deported, right? Something very terrible and very bad, then we need these systems in place. Could they be more efficient? Maybe, perhaps, but we need due process and we need accountability. And Trump's getting rid of that and got rid of many of it. And Nigel Farage wants to do the same. I was looking at the reform contract yesterday, and it says that they would take away citizenship to people who have dual citizenship and deport them if they commit certain types of crimes. So, just saying.
Anything to add, Nuffle?
No, I think Lewis summed it up perfectly.
So we've got this one. I'm not sure. I'm sorry. I don't know if you're Kira Avi or if you're Kira the Seventh or Kira V, but we'll go with Kira. You've said, I mean, all we have to do is look at the history when liberal governments have paved the way to full-out fascist governments. They've managed to do so by convincing a good amount of people to yearn for fascism.
Yeah, and that's when I was bringing up that, like, people yearn for the mind joke. People actually yearn for fascism.
It is concerning, though, that we're at this point where, rather than actually tackling the issues that are really hurting the country and that are really affecting people, we're just quite literally taking a leaf out of, Enoch Powell's playbook, and, we're going down that sort of far right, let's appease all the racists, let's use this rhetoric. I mean, Care for Calais have obviously, they've come out and called on Starmer to apologise for his use of language for the Enoch Powell comment as well. So yeah, it's sad that we've come to this.
But by the way, I don't know if I think I saved one of these comments earlier, but I just want to point it out just in case we don't get to it. Yeah, Enoch Powell was fired the next day. I believe that is the correct story. Was he resigned or fired the next day, or was he offered to resign because of that speech? And people forget that part. So we've got Keir Starmer using a line from the speech, the most racist and historical speech in British history when it comes to this topic, and he had to resign from a 1960s Conservative Party for his rhetoric, which, by the way, Margaret Thatcher actually made a positive comment about his speech, just to point out. And now we've got Keir Starmer using similar lines. That's where we're at.
It was Jacqueline that.
We both don't know if he had to fire, he was fired, or had to resign, which is essentially getting fired. Yeah, it's crazy.
Specs has said Starmer is not doing politics and definitely not aping to the worst of the Tory/Farage talking points, not just being very adult and grown up. My God, this is vile.
Yeah.
It was that comment that he made, wasn't it? Sorry to interrupt. When he said that, people who like politics, people who actually pay attention and know what the fuck is going on, will say that this is about, trying to appease a certain party or trying to play, but it's not. It's because it's the right thing to do.
I just looked it up. Enoch Powell was dismissed. He didn't resign. So
yeah, I knew it was one or the other. The next day, I remember that bit though. This was in Birmingham. What's interesting actually as well about the Keir speech as well, I didn't write this down to point out, and maybe I'm just being too fucking leftist and pointing this out because I'm just trying to string things together. But when he said 1 million people are coming into the country, that's the population of Birmingham. I feel like invoking Birmingham as well. Am I being too nitpicky because Birmingham's a hot topic because of the populations of people who live there? Am I looking into that too much?
I thought the same. Maybe like you said, it was just your like a radar going off or whatever. But it sort of felt, if not intentional, it definitely felt weird considering the flack Birmingham gets for its population.
No, and Andy knows what's going on. Andy said Starmer definitely knew that speech will have been workshopped within an inch of its life.
That's true.
Yeah. I mean, we knew over the weekend, didn't we? We found out, was it Friday or Saturday? We found out that this announcement was going to be coming and that Labour were going to lay out their plan. So, I mean, it's been in the work for a while. I wouldn't be surprised if they were... Well, no, actually, I was going to say I wouldn't be surprised if they've been planning this since before the election. But actually, I think they probably cobbled it together afterwards.
Yeah. Do you know who I'd love to see, interview Starmer right now in this moment? And, call me a fucking liberal, but Lewis Goodall, because he is an absolute political nerd. He has literally this is what he does in his spare time in the lead up to elections. He re-watches elections on the BBC from the 1950s, 60s, 70s, and 80s. That's how much of a geek he is. And he's so good with certain parts of political history, and he invokes it in such a skillful way. I would love to see Lewis Goodall just tear into Keir Starmer on this, because
You only like him because he's
he would be good at this type of interview right now. He'd be the perfect person to interview him. I don't think he
No, it would
will.
be interesting to see. Well, you never know. I mean, he does a lot with. I mean, he's got his own show on LBC, and obviously does the news agents. So I mean, there might be that's not beyond the realm of possibility of that happening.
Yeah.
There was one. Jim Speak said, "Picture the scene: you're bedbound and need someone to wipe your ass. Do you ask them to identify the noun in this sentence first?" This is obviously in relation to the requirements about English. And it's interesting because Rupert Lowe actually tweeted this morning and said, Starmer quotes, "When people come to our country, they should also commit to integration, to learning our language." And then Rupert Lowe's added, "Total tripe. They shouldn't commit to learning English. They should be entirely fluent before they arrive. You live in England, you speak English." But as many have pointed out, and I'm looking for the comment now, English isn't the only official language of the UK. Obviously, there's other languages too in Scotland and in Wales. So, yeah, this idea that people have to be, learning
Yeah.
the language.
There's also a lot
More
of
so
nuance
when
to
there's
it as well.
already quite difficult language, tests that need to be passed anyway before you can work in this country.
There's also a lot of nuance to it as well. My dad used to work in a factory in Leeds that made this one specific pressure pump. They were the only ones who made it in the world, and they had some Chinese clients who wanted to bring some of their workers over for 2 years in the UK. They did not speak English. There was one designated translator who stayed with them for 2 years, and this is when you need nuance with a lot of these conversations. I do think there's obviously some expectation that somebody's going to be able to function within the country if they're coming here to work legally, but I would leave that down to the employer, right? It's what the employer needs. Putting any sort of restriction on somebody's wife or husband or partner who's coming with them is ridiculous and just stupid and completely unnecessary. And obviously, we can't conditionalize asylum on that, because that would just be stupid. But they want to get rid of asylum anyway.
I think as well, to add to what you said, because one of the guidelines they put was proficiency tests in language for dependents, and I honestly think that's a very, very cruel, just straight off cruel. If we take a look from a position where you're not a refugee, you're not an asylum seeker, you're someone that wants a better life somewhere else because your country maybe isn't looking the best, right? And we know people already moving out the UK, different minorities, because they feel like it's not a good place for them. And I've spoke to many people that have wanted to move out to the UK, move out from the UK, because they feel like, well, actually, I don't feel like this country cares about me, whatever group you are. If you're a trans person, if you're a second generation immigrant, even if you're a first generation immigrant. And I think uprooting your whole life because it looks like your country is going to shit, and taking dependents with you, maybe a mother or a father that can't speak this language. If we were to move from the UK to Norway or to Spain, for example, right? It's really cruel to try and, if they're not working, to try and force proficiency tests in language for them, because I don't think everyone has the ability, the time, or the privilege to feel like they can learn that language if they're a dependent that's wanting to move over with someone that's going to work anyways.
Yeah, I mean, other people have said it, but it will be interesting if Spain were to adopt the same policy. We're going to see a huge influx in British migrants, or expats, as some call them, returning back to the UK, because we're famous, aren't we, for going and living in Spain and definitely being fluent in Spanish before we go. Give me a break. We're gonna have to.
We should change the pension rules, right? Let's change the pension rules. Any person who's living in a foreign country and collects British pension, if you do not proficiently speak the language of that country, you cannot claim your pension. There we go. How about that? Let's do that.
I like that. I like that. But yeah, we are going to have to call it a night. But just before we do, Border Prince.
Any memberships and donations? Can we quickly make sure we mention them?
Yeah, I'll double check that. But just Border Prince's comment, just to finish on the comments. I thought Starmer was going to be bad, but not quite this bad. And I think that sort of sums it up really. But yes, we've got Michael Anson gifting a Turn Left membership. Thank you
very much, Michael.
for that. Specs has gifted 5 Turn Left memberships as well. We're grateful
Thank you so
for
much,
that.
Specs. Specs is always gifting.
Michael's gifted another 1, which we're grateful for.
you.
Andy's gifted 1 Turn Left
Andy in
membership.
there with the
Thank you
membership.
for that. Andy's gifted 1 more Turn Left membership as well.
Oh,
And then just finally, we've got a super chat from Rachel, who's asked with a $2 donation. Thank you for that donation. How long till there's demand for Undertaker visas?
give it a couple of years, I guess. How when they privatized the NHS, I guess not reform, Labour.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just to go back to the comment about like I knew Starmer was going to be bad. I knew he was going to lean into maybe like Tory economics, like that we're going to be fiscally responsible, that type of stuff. Perhaps with the odd dog whistle, not because it's acceptable, but just because it's what is expected. I didn't see them going this far with the tactics that they're trying to do. I do still find myself shocked. Maybe I'm naive for finding myself continuing to be shocked by certain aspects. But we'll see. We'll see what else happens. Maybe they'll go as far as is it Poland who suspended asylum applications or something? I feel like every time they see a new poll coming out in 1 to 2 months showing the results of their policies or actions or whatever it might be, it's just going to be a case of, right, we've gone this far, what else do we need to do? How else can we become far right? Okay, let's suspend asylum. You know what, if you've been caught speeding in your car, deported, because that's what Trump's doing, by the way, like parking tickets and speeding fines for deporting people. So we'll see what the future holds with Keir Starmer and the Labour Party. Any last thoughts from you, Noffel?
I don't think, maybe I didn't think too much in the future about how it would have gone, but I think I knew was kind of Keir Starmer would be particularly not good, because just days out from the election, he somehow managed to hit 3 things which he just genuinely didn't need to do. One was calling trans women not women. 2 was somehow going for Bengali refugees, and the other MP, and I
Before
forgot
the election.
Yeah, it was absolutely no need, which make up like 3% of asylum applicants. And the third last thing was when I got the Labour leaflet, because I was a registered Labour voter before, when I got the Labour leaflet through my door, what I actually found was the first thing they sent me was just a picture of people on boats and saying stop the boats or whatever it was. And I was like, you know what, Starmer, you've really proven yourself to be a useless idiot. So yeah, I'm not going to be looking towards Labour in any form of giving them any benefit of the doubt, no matter how the party goes from now on.
We'll see what happens with them. But thank you very much, Noffel, for being with us today. I do want to comment on Vicky's comment, and I'm going to earn that £5 from you, Vicky, because I absolutely despise Isabel Oakeshott. And just to remind anyone, just in case they don't know who she is, this is Richard Tice's partner, because I don't think they're married. She lives in, anyone correct me, Dubai, I believe, and she lives there as I remember in an interview she said her motivation was moving there was the VAT added on school. So just to put it into context, the Richard Tice, reform, Nigel Farage, reform. These are the people who say people are coming here from countries and cultures that don't match with our own. Isabel Oakeshott's out there living in Dubai. That's one of those countries that they're talking about. Muslim countries, Sharia law, and she's out there living there with her 2 or 3 kids. And also she said about a year ago on Talk TV that the Southport, not about a year ago because it was only 9 months ago, around the time that it happened, Southport people who were arrested and jailed are political prisoners. Very January the 6th of her. So yeah, I very much despise Isabella Oakeshott. If you are not too familiar with who she is. But thank you again, Vicky. Thank you again, Noffel, and thank you again, Callum. Now, that is the end of the show. So thank you again for joining us. Again, please like and comment on the stream. And obviously, if you wish to support us, you can go to turnleftmedia.co.uk/support and give us a one-off donation, or you can sign up to our Patreon as well for monthly donations to support what we do. We are having some upcoming events where we're using the money very wisely that you guys have gifted, donated, and contributed towards us. So some amazing content is going to be hopefully coming out over the next month about some of the stuff that we're doing. So look forward to seeing that. Hopefully got some interviews in the pipeline too. So we will see. And we will see you again on Wednesday, because it is Monday. We will see you again on Wednesday. I need a cup of tea. Thank you again and have a good evening.